What do ideas look like? The most obvious form is words on a page, but that's far from the only way to convey a thought, a point, or a worldview, because frankly, conveying an idea is the entire purview of visual art. Everything humans do or make is, on some level, art, and all those everythings also express ideas. From the earliest cave paintings in stacked rocks to impossibly lifelike statues in the soaring halls of cathedrals. However subtle or overt, they're saying something. And one artist who wrestled the absolute maximum out of his paints to say something was Raphael or Raphael. Working in the early 1500s at the height of the Italian Renaissance, this young painter iterated on the techniques of his mentors and peers to create some of the most ideologically evocative frescoes in all of Christendom. And let's be honest, I reference the school of Athens so damn frequently that Raphael is well overdue for the history maker's treatment, so let's do some art history. Now, for the sake of me actually getting to the point today, permit me a hyper-simplified primer on Christian art history to put the Renaissance in context. So in record time, the gist is thus. From its Roman origins through the Middle Ages, the vast majority of Christian art was occupied with depicting figures and scenes from the Bible. An extremely logical thing to do, certainly, because the point was lifting Christianity off of the page and out of the past to make it both present and physical. Churches, statues, murals, manuscripts, and mosaics and faith settings were all aligned on illustrating that faith. The big swerve came in the 1400s as artists in Italy, but mostly Florence, pulled motifs, styles, and design principles from outside religion into a Christian context. So as Dante stuffed his vision of the afterlife with people and places from classical antiquity, so too were artists merging the techniques and aesthetics of the Greco-Roman world with Christianity. Classical culture had, of course, been there the whole time, but authors and artists were being a lot more deliberate about it in the 14 and 1500s. Great, so now that we've exhaustively covered everything about Christian art and our PhDs are in the mail, how does our boy Raph fit in? Well, when he started painting in 1499, the Renaissance itself was changing in a few big ways. First and foremost, technique. Color, lighting, posing, and especially composition were constantly improving through the decades. Take this fresco by Raphael's mentor Pietro Perugino, Christ giving the keys to St. Peter from 1482, and compare it with Raphael's own Marriage of the Virgin from 1504. Same core idea, key action by the foreground characters, big building in the background, but improvements in linear perspective make the painting feel more like an actual 3D space. March of progress. The second big shift to Renaissance art was geographic, as the hotbed of new artistic output was no longer the Republic of Florence, but Rome, and specifically the Vatican. This goes hand in hand with the third shift being whom the art was for. In 1400s Florence, most art was made for display, so citizens would appreciate the moneybags patrons who paid for it. Not quite so in Rome, as the seat of the popes was much more aristocratic in character, which makes sense because it was literally a monarchy, and that meant the best art was reserved for private enjoyment. For a point of comparison, the artist Michelangelo made two masterpieces in the span of a decade. In Florence, his statue The David stood outside for all to see, while the Sistine Chapel ceiling adorns the personal chapel of the Pope. When the papacy commissioned great art, it didn't much share, and that is why most of the stunning achievements of the so-called High Renaissance in the 1500s and 1510s are crammed into the 3 square blocks surrounding the Pope's bathtub. And it's this very environment, at the exact same time Michelangelo was spackling the ceiling, that Raphael came to Rome in 1508 at the invitation of Pope Julius II. His first task, scarcely 10 years into his career as an artist, was frescoing the walls of the Pope's personal library. And what a reading room it was! The combination of extremely specific design spec and functionally unlimited budget was unheard of before this, as was the task of painting a secular space for the world's most Catholic man, and it led Raphael to compose a radical innovation in what art could do with allegory, inventing scenes to articulate an idea and putting those ideas in conversation. So, what was Raphael's strategy? Essentially, he painted 4 separate allegories that combine to represent what a library means, where knowledge comes from, and what it accomplishes. The 4 frescoes here are colloquially known as Parnassus, the School of Athens, the Disputation of the Holy Sacrament, and the Virtues, representing poetry, philosophy, theology, and justice. Let's start where literature started and take a look at poetry. The Parnassus presents a poetic hall of fame with Apollo and the 9 muses hanging out with 9 ancient poets and 9 modern ones, not cordoned off by time period, but all mingling together, like how Dante is up in the epic corner with Homer and Virgil. Another fun bit of time bending is giving Apollo a contemporary lira da braccio rather than an ancient lyre. So the overall effect is to join contemporary Italian poetry with the classical past and do so on equal footing. There's a similar blending going on across the room, with the fresco of cardinal and theological virtues, where civil law and the figures of fortitude, prudence, and temperance sit alongside personifications of charity, hope, and faith, who represent religious canon law. The fourth cardinal virtue, justice, has pride of place on the ceiling, as, according to Plato, justice ensures the other virtues operate in harmony. So just as ancient poets coexist with modern ones, so too can values, as Raphael paints a straightforward but evocative synthesis of secular and spiritual ideas. And in case that was too subtle, the last two frescoes in the room make it very overt. On one wall, theology, knowledge of the divine. On the other, philosophy, everything else. Now, this being the Pope's library, theology is an obvious choice of subject matter, and the fresco is an allegory for the millennium-spanning process of puzzling out how religion works and what it means. Above are Christ and the saints chillaxing in heaven, while generations of church scholars down on earth work to make sense of it. If I may briefly reiterate that Raphael was very good at his job, he's composed two parallel scenes with linear perspective in a single 3D space, in an allegory he invented from scratch. This goes beyond pure Bible scene or symbolic figures, it's about the process of creating Christianity. Dang, he's good. And speaking of nobody doing that before, this takes us to the fourth fresco of the lot, and probably my favorite painting in history, the School of Athens. This is an imagined scene of all the great philosophers of classical antiquity, not in any actual school from ancient Athens, but a great hall modeled on plans for the new St. Peter's Basilica, under construction at the time scarcely 100 meters away. This is a subtle, not so subtle acknowledgement that ancient pagan thinking had been co-opted into a Christian worldview, but it's also a literal framing device that highlights our two main characters. Smack in the middle of the fresco at the so-called vanishing point of the perspective are Plato and Aristotle. Once again, Raphael has gotten so absurdly good at this that he can make the pair the obvious focus despite them not being in the foreground and sharing the stage with over 50 other figures. My favorite trick he pulled to accomplish that is how they are the only two with daylight behind them. An excellent little nudge to draw the viewer's eye. Now, as we know from reading their works, these two titans of Greek thinking held wildly diverging theories on how the universe works and how humans fit into it, and Raphael illustrates that contrast with something as small and simple as a hand gesture. Plato points up towards the intangible world of ideals and abstract forms which reflect into the physical world below. Aristotle holds his hand out, palm down, gesturing to tangible reality and the empirical knowledge by which humans understand it. This encapsulates books upon books, gallons of ink, beautifully posed as just two hands. This is so elegant that spelling it out makes me sound like a madman. Oh my god, you guys, he's pointing! The man painted the other man pointing! He's a genius! See? Crazy talk. Now, of course, there's also everyone else in the painting, and Raphael has a little fun with it. This rainbow of figures includes Socrates being a menace, Pythagoras doing math, Ptolemy and Zoroaster with the earthly and heavenly spears, and Diogenes sprawled along the steps. No respect, 10 out of 10. And some characters are pulling double duty, as the mathematician Euclid is a portrait of Donato Bramante, the very architect behind the new St. Peter's and a close personal friend of Raphael who likely consulted on the architecture in this very painting. Plato here is a dead ringer for Leonardo da Vinci, and we can tell from test sketches that Heraclitus down in front was a late addition representing Michelangelo. One can easily imagine Raphael walking just down the hall to see the Sistine Chapel actively in progress and thinking, oh wow, okay, yeah, he's a genius. And then onto the wall he went. And lastly, our humble Raph snuck in a tiny self-portrait looking right at the viewer. On its own, a bit of fun with his fellow artists, but if we look back to the Parnassus fresco with mingling past and present, Raphael may be making a bold statement. The lineage of supreme human achievement, which began in Athens, continues in Renaissance Rome, not as written philosophy, but as art, with these four as masters of this new age. Now let's put this all together and see if Raphael might be onto something. The School of Athens is, as much as one painting can capture, a comprehensive visual allegory of how the Renaissance received classical thought. A vivid palette of thinkers in conversation, their thoughts bouncing around the scene like they bounce within the heads of every student who reads them. It was a pretty radical swerve to paint what is ostensibly a purely pagan subject matter, but within the physical framing of St. Peter's Basilica and in conversation with the other frescoes in the room, this allegory for classical thought is made to coexist within a Christian context. Recall that this room was a library, so whether we're looking at the discussions which comprise philosophy or the disputes over theology, both frescoes depict the process of thinking, earthly investigation making a parallel to divine contemplation. Put all four scenes together and we're consciously assembling classical wisdom with Christian culture, which is, to bring it back, the fundamental tenet of the Renaissance. The School of Athens is an allegory for philosophy, It and the Disputa are an allegory for thinking, and the room is an allegory for the entire Renaissance. Are you kidding me? He wins! Raphael wins art! How is he so good at this? Good God! Sanzio, stop! Anyway, fun video. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.